Hello and welcome to the Psychedelic Skeptic. I'm your host, Dr. Ann Metz. Today I'm launching a new episode format called The Psychedelic Spaceman. I'd like to introduce you to my new news sidekick, Psychedelic Spaceman.
Yeah, I'm the Psychedelic Spaceman, and this is the Psychedelic Spaceman, your source for news and the latest doings in psychedelic therapy and related matters. And, well, take it away, Dr. Metz.
Well, thanks, Psychedelic Spaceman. Let's get back to it.
You never see positive drug stories on the news, do you? Isn't that weird? Since most of the experiences I've had on drugs were real positive. How about a positive LSD story? Wouldn't that be newsworthy just once to base your decision on information rather than scare tactics and superstition and lies? I think it would be newsworthy. Today, a young man on acid realized that all matter is merely energy condensed to a slow vibration, that we are all one consciousness experiencing itself subjectively. There is no such thing as death. Life is only a dream, and we're the imagination of ourselves. Here's Tom with the weather.
And that was the late, great comedian Bill Hicks. And back when he observed that there were very few positive drug stories in the 1990s, that was very true. But can you imagine the field day Bill Hicks would be having if he were still around? Nearly every psychedelic story hitting the headlines these days is painting them in a positive light. It's a far cry from the just say no era most of us grew up in, and we're much more likely to hear a good LSD story than a bad one on the evening news. But as exciting as the shift in public perception is, it's crucial that we find a middle ground. It's great to celebrate the potentials of psychedelics, but we can't ignore the risks and challenges that come with their use. So on today's episode of It's the Psychedelic Space, Man, we'll be doing a deep dive into the newly proposed regulations for Colorado's upcoming legal psilocybin services program. Yes, I know, it's about policy.
Can you give me the TLDR version, Dr. Metz?
Okay, so here's the big picture. Colorado is making it difficult but possible to become a licensed facilitator. It may be a little easier for people who are already mental health professionals. The possible upside is that this could help legitimize psychedelic therapy and make it safer. But the downside is that the stringent requirements might mean many patients and practitioners will continue to take an informal and possibly unsafe approach to seeking or providing treatment.
That's fascinating, Dr. Metz. Tell me more.
Becoming a certified psilocybin facilitator in Colorado will not be an easy path. The regulations outline a multi-step process that individuals have to go through, including completing an approved facilitator training program, passing the state exam, meeting certain ethics and criminal background check requirements, and you have to be 21 years old. So the educational programs for prospective facilitators have yet to be established, but the regulations do provide one pathway to facilitate easier entry for credentialed professionals. So folks like me who already hold active licenses in fields like psychology, counseling, social work, psychiatry, would potentially qualify for a clinical facilitator certification. And this dual licensing would allow mental health professionals to not only facilitate psilocybin sessions, but also to provide some more comprehensive clinical care and psychotherapy to clients. So this is a significant departure from what is happening in Oregon. So in Oregon, therapists who are also licensed psilocybin facilitators are not permitted to provide any kind of therapy as part of the experience, which is frankly ridiculous and not in the best interest of the clients they serve. So I would say that Colorado has at least been able to benefit from what is not working particularly well in Oregon. We're going to have more on that in a couple weeks when I speak with a licensed facilitator who works and practices in Oregon. And of course, just like Oregon, these regulations were put together by a committee of people with varied but strongly held agendas. And as a result, there was some weird stuff that ended up in the draft that I thought would be amusing. Here is one example. Supportive touch must be consented to by a participant prior to the administration session, regardless of the individual providing the supportive touch, and must be documented in the physical touch contract. Under no circumstances may supportive touch be used on any part of the body other than the hands, feet, or shoulders, or otherwise be sexual in nature. There are so many strange things in that particular policy that I'm not even sure where to start. But I would say the biggest one for me is that it's really strange that somehow it is hands, shoulders, and feet. Like, why is anybody touching someone's feet? In what situation is that going to be therapeutically helpful? There is a bigger conversation, obviously, to have around therapeutic touch with psychedelics, which is a pretty significant departure from usually how we do things in psychotherapy. So I admit that I am a little bit uneasy about therapeutic touch in general, but it makes no sense that it is like totally fine to touch someone's feet, but you are absolutely not allowed to touch their arms or even their upper back or their head. I just want everyone to know there that if you end up going to Colorado and some psilocybin clinician touches your feet, A-okay, but if they touch your arm, you have a policy violation on your hands. So here's another one. A facilitator may not consume or otherwise be under the influence of natural medicine or any other intoxicant while providing natural medicine services. You may have thought this one would have actually been self-evident, but believe it or not, it's pretty common in the underground for guides or shamans to consume whatever substance the participant is taking. So if the person is taking mushrooms, the shaman or the guide also takes mushrooms. This was something that happened with the underground guide that I trained with. She'd usually take a small amount of mushrooms when she was holding a session, which I always thought was weird. So I'm glad that Colorado is officially putting the kibosh on this practice.
Got it. But what does that mean for me?
On the positive side, stringent standards for facilitators could help legitimize psychedelic therapy and integrate it into the mainstream healthcare system. And I think the clinical facilitator pathway also will allow mental health providers to incorporate psilocybin into their existing practices, which, as a licensed provider who lives very close to the Colorado border, I have to admit I like that idea. But I'm sure that people will argue that some of the high barriers to entry, such as the inevitable educational costs and some of the regulatory compliances, may end up excluding some underserved communities as well as traditional practitioners. So, from a financial perspective, these high costs of training and licensing and administrative overhead could probably make psilocybin services really expensive for clients and also for taxpayers if they end up being covered under the public health programs. So these are the highlights and the core components of what's shaping up to be an extensive and comprehensive regulatory system for Colorado's psilocybin services.
So, Dr. Metz, what's your take? Because I know you got one.
I think that having a firm regulatory foundation could instill public confidence in psychedelic therapy and also open the doors for it to become more widely available and accepted. That said, I do have concerns about the logistical burdens, cost of compliance, and whether an overly rigid medicalized system fails to honor the spiritual contexts that have surrounded psilocybin's use for centuries. I think there are also going to be significant accessibility and equity implications that had to be considered. Also, the feet thing. Putting all that aside, I think Colorado's plan is shaping up to be a lot better than what is happening in Oregon. But only time will tell if Colorado has struck a reasonable balance with these initial proposed regulations. I'm going to continue to monitor closely as the rules are refined.
The Psychedelic Skeptic was created by Dr. Ann Metz, with help this week from Jesse Dukes, who is also very well acquainted with the Psychedelic Spaceman. Our podcast music is by Wes Swing. The Psychedelic Skeptic is available on your favorite podcast app. You can learn more at annmetz.com or follow on Instagram at Dr. Metz. That's M-E-T-Z, just like it sounds. If you want to recommend a guest for the show or ask a question about psychedelic therapy, send a note at hello@annmetz.com. If you like the show, please leave a review on your favorite podcast app, as you know from every other podcast. This has been the Psychedelic Space Man, and I'm the Psychedelic Spaceman. See you out in the cosmos.